Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and this is this week's issue of the Libertarian Angle. The show, as many of you know, brings you the libertarian perspective on what's going on in the world, and I'm joined, as I am every week, by Richard Ebeling, who teaches economics at the Citadel. Richard, good to see you again.
Great to see you, Jacob, and to our viewers and listeners.
Yeah, I thought we'd move into a little bit different world here, the world of politics, Richard, and specifically the world of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who has roiled the political world. This is a young woman in her late 20s who's been elected to Congress. She defeated an old line incumbent. She's from the Bronx. She has certainly stirred the waters politically, bringing up a lot of the standard, or I should say classical liberal positions, i.e. socialism. So I thought, we ought to discuss the socialism of this woman. She's certainly influencing the Democratic Party to move in a more classically socialist direction. And what I also find interesting about her is that she has totally roiled the conservative movement. I've never seen conservatives so obsessed with one person as they are with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So I thought, okay, let's discuss the socialism of this woman, what she's doing to the Democratic Party, and the reaction of conservatives to this, and then where we libertarians come out on this entire controversy. And you've written an article that we're posting today that's about the Green New Deal, which is a term that's kind of been percolating around, but she's kind of brought it into notoriety. So why don't you kick off the show and give us your perspective of what's going on with this Green New Deal and in a larger context, the movement towards socialism that this young Congresswoman seems to be moving the Democratic Party.
Well, let me sort of back step it just a little bit to put this in context. Following the fall of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s, to a great extent, socialism as an idea, as a policy proposal, as a movement, practically disappeared from the scene. There was still particular advocates of socialism who said, oh, their socialism was not the Soviet brand of socialism and so on. But socialism was basically thrown into disrepute. In fact, a lot of conservatives, with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the USSR, were slapping themselves on the back, patting themselves on the back. We won, the commies lost. Well, on one level that was true, but the fact is what did not win was really free market, individualism, capitalism. What won was basically what had developed in the West, this interventionist welfare state with some private enterprise and profit-oriented activity, some market-based incomes, but redistributed in various ways by the state. And the various interventions that the government undertook in the 90s and then into this century all set the stage in one way or another for what became the financial crisis of 2008 and 2009 and its aftermath. And then suddenly this, again, the socialists and the sympathizers of a collectivist alternative to a free society all came out of the woodwork and said, you see, another failure of capitalism. We warned you in the past and it's happened again. And capitalism was thrown into the disrepute. And what began to rise in a sort of a new ascendancy, belief that government only has the answers. Only government can keep the economy growing and stable and just. And that set the stage for all of these strongly leftist tendencies that had been in the Democratic Party for decades, particularly in what is often labeled or generally called the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, all brought them to the ascendancy. This was reinforced by this new version of their ideas in the form of identity politics that, the old socialists, for all of their shortcomings, basically said, we're all human beings. There are class exploiters and class people who oppress, but in one sense, we're all human beings. There was an internationalist or universalist content or flavor to the socialist appeal. However wrong-headed the classical liberal might consider the content of it. But now the new progressivism, the new American socialism, is all based upon a tribalism. Are you African American? Are you Hispanic? Are you Asian? Are you an indigenous American? Are you this? Are you that? And as a consequence, you are no longer just a human being with whether you believe in the classical liberal definition of rights or the old socialist notion of the rights of all people as the toilers of the world. Now we're back into a racist, genderist tribalism. And these two forces have been rising to the surface. And they've all combined in people like Alexandria, who believe that capitalism has failed. We need to restore a future for America by a grand vision of government planning. Now, in a sense, how can you justify government planning? I mean, failure in the Soviet Union, all the East Bloc countries, China, which is still technically a communist-run system, has sort of backstepped on the old Maoist form of central planning. So how do you now and this has to do with this Green New Deal. Obviously, trying to take a rhetorical step up from Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. Only this new Green New Deal is based upon the idea that in 12 years, and that's what Alexandria has said, in 12 years, based upon a UN-sponsored report, the world is going to end. Like the religious nuts, repent, repent, the world is ending next week. They have said in 12 years, fire and brimstone, and the heavens will fall, and the oceans will rise, and we're all going to burn to a crisp. Oh no, we need a secular God. And that's the socialist movement. And what is being proposed in this, and they're very clear, in the proposed congressional committee that has been signed off by her and these others of her ilk who are either outside or have recently been brought into the Congress based upon the latest congressional election, that we now have to have a committee to design, a congressional committee to design a comprehensive, total central plan for the U.S. economy. Industry must be regulated or nationalized through government taking ownership of equity shares. Agriculture must be transformed. How we produce, what we consume, how our lifestyles are to be allowed. All because, in other words, we're all going to die through drowning from the rising oceans or burning to a crisp due to rising temperatures. Oh my gosh, fire and brimstone. Oh, please, where's the savior? And that's what they're proposing. And it has to be understood, they're serious about this, Jacob. If you read this proposal for a congressional committee, which may be established, though because of the old liners in the Democratic Party might be modified, they want not one corner of American society to be left free of government vision, supervision, control, and command. And combined with their idea of identity politics, social justice, they say this is the opportunity to bring justice and fairness and government spending to every corner of the society to raise up the marginalized and the oppressed. So they're combining all of this using this idea of the scare of global warming to be the catalyst, if you will, for the imposition of a central plan. Now, some critics have raised, both conservatives and libertarians in their articles, well, how are you going to pay for this? This is tens of trillions of dollars. And that is likely to be the price tag were to come true. But if you read their proposal, well, what if you can't soak the rich enough to make the expenses fully covered? They make it clear. That's what you have a central bank for, to print up any amount of money we need to fund the remaking of America in their vision. Hello, welcome potentially to a Venezuela-style hyperinflation to fund the grandiose dreams of the collectivist social engineers. That is the vision that they're proposing. Now, we have an extremely unattractive, socially often repugnant individual in the White House. that makes it easy for them to say, you see, that's the alternative. It's either Trump or people like us. And, well, who wants him? He represents sexism, racism, a disregard of the poor and the oppressed. So it's either him versus us. And they're playing upon this dichotomy of that's the only alternative to arouse support. And it sounds extreme, but remember, every extreme idea begins with a proponent who seems to be a nut at first. This is a serious proposal, and there have been people elected to Congress who endorse and are pushing for this and trying to shove the Democratic Party more into that even more radicalized, quote, progressive-socialist wing. And it needs to be taken seriously, Jacob.
Richard, may I make a suggestion to you?
Yes.
You need to start telling people exactly where you stand on issues, because you're just not real clear. I mean,
well, now, wait a minute. Are you suggesting that in my last comments I had a hint of a critical tone?
Well, no.
You're not saying that, are you?
No, I'm suggesting you were very fuzzy about where you stand on things, and people, can't really understand where you're coming from. All right, let me put things into an even bigger context, because you're absolutely right that the left looks at the society in which we live, and they see that as a capitalist system. And they've been taught that this is a free enterprise system. We've all been raised believing that from the first grade in the government-run socialist school systems. We're taught when we pledge allegiance that this is a free country. We sing songs, paeans to thank God I'm an American because at least I know I'm free. And we thank the troops for living and for protecting our freedoms. So everybody's indoctrinated with this notion that we live in a free society, a capitalist society, a free enterprise society. And so when things go bad, like the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan and the whole military industrial complex and military and CIA spending going out the gazoo and NSA surveillance schemes and out of control spending, they say, see what capitalism does? Because they honestly believe this. Now, if we look at the libertarian ideal, okay, what is that? Well, it's totally different from the kind of society in which we live today. And this is what always shocks the left. It also shocks the Republicans, the conservatives, because we libertarians stand in a whole different world. What is our vision for a free society? No income tax at all. So while conservatives and liberals like Alexandria they're debating, should the marginal tax rate be at 30% or should it be at 70%? They think this is a great ideological debate. Man, you can see it in the press that conservatives are going crazy saying, man, this woman's way off base, making it 70%. We really need it at 30%. We libertarians are in a whole different world. We say nobody should be paying income taxes at all. It's your money. You keep everything you earn. You want to know why you're not making ends meet, why you can't save any money, why you can't get a down payment, why you're deferring marriage in your 20s, why you're still living with your parents in your early 30s? Take a look at your paycheck and see what they're taking out, the government, including the matching funds that your employer is sending to the government, because that's part of your compensation package. That money would be coming to you. Then you multiply that out over a year and then over 10 years, and you see what's going on here. No immigration controls where people can come in, and that's an economic boon. That was one of the major contributors to the prosperity in the late 1800s in America. No Federal Reserve System, no central bank, a free market monetary system where you got sound money. No economic regulations, a total separation of economy and the state. No national security state, no Pentagon, CIA, NSA, foreign wars, foreign adventures, regime change operations, assassinations, coups, torture. All right, now you're talking about a totally different society. Now you're talking about a genuinely free society. And this is what our ancestors, especially in the late 1800s, understood. Because they didn't have these things. They didn't have a drug war and torture and assassination and income taxation, central bank, and so forth, immigration controls. Now you're talking about genuine prosperity and, more important, genuine freedom. Okay, so as you mentioned, Franklin Roosevelt comes along and says, oh, well, free enterprise has failed. And this was the start of the big lies. You know, that here free enterprise had failed with the stock market crash in 1929. And everybody's indoctrinated with that notion. You're taught that in your public schools and your history classes. Government has to teach this lie. Why? Because it wasn't the failure of free enterprise. It was the failure of central planning. As you've pointed out in your great book, Monetary Central Planning in the State, the Federal Reserve is a socialist institution because it engages in monetary central planning. Central planning is a core feature of socialism. So that's what caused the stock market crash in 1929. And then they go into this New Deal that Alejandra is now modeling her Green New Deal after, which is just a series of socialist program, beginning with Social Security, which is a socialist program, takes money from one group of people and gives it to another group. There's no retirement fund there that you put your money into. And then myriad regulations of the society and the economy. You've got the National Industrial Recovery Act, which is a classic example, the cartelization of American society. But then out of this grows the entire welfare state way of life, which itself is a socialist construct. It's not total socialism, but it nationalizes in combination with the income tax, people's income, and then subjects that confiscated income to redistribution to others. Classic socialist Marxist concept, from each according to ability to each according to need. And as libertarians have shown, Roosevelt's New Deal actually made things worse. It prevented a recovery from what the Federal Reserve had done in the 1920s that caused the stock market crash. So now when we come to today, you see the left complaining about their system, the whole welfare state, the regulated society, but in their minds, this is capitalism, when really it's an indictment of their own system, including the public school system, which is a classic socialist program. And then so now is surfacing the old philosophy, the motivating factors behind progressivism in the first place, and that was coveting. That they hate the fact that people have more when they have less. And you've got this biblical injunction that says, thou shalt not covet, one of the 10 commandments. And yet that's the driving force here. You've got this argument being made that there shouldn't be any billionaires. And that's one of the things that she has said. There just shouldn't be any billionaires. Really, why not? What's wrong with billionaires if they have made their money in the marketplace, providing goods and services that other people want, like a Bill Gates or something? Now, if they made their money in combination with the state, like a corporatism, that's a whole different thing. Libertarians stand against that. But if you make your money providing goods and services to people, that means you're being rewarded because people want to buy your goods and services. But that sense of envy and covetousness, and they say, well, we just want to get rid of the billionaires. But you know that the driving force will then, once they get rid of the billionaires, will then go down to the millionaires. I mean, this is what Castro did. Castro took from the rich. It's exactly what the left wants to do. He just followed the principles to their logical conclusion. He took everything from the rich. And then the society starts to devolve. Why? Because the private sector is the key to rising standards of living. Sure, there may be people who are tremendously wealthy in a totally pure market economy, but the fact is the people at the bottom have significantly higher standards of living in this process than they would if everybody was equal and everybody desperately poor. So if people can conquer this sense of covetousness and envy and end up in a society where everybody is free to keep everything he's earned, everybody benefits in that kind of society. And what the left is doing is really engaging in more of what has destroyed the basis for prosperity, morality, and liberty in our society by calling for more of the economic junk that they've called for since at least the time of the Franklin Roosevelt administration, and even back then when the progressive socialist movement was getting started in the late 1800s.
Well, all I can say is, you have to stop being fuzzy, Jacob. What do you really stand for? I mean, I'm confused. Freedom? He didn't explain what that. Obviously, you have to be clearer. The fact is that you're absolutely right that there's a strong streak of envy. And for the viewers and listeners, there's an excellent book that was written in the 1960s just called Envy by a German sociologist named Helmut Schuck. It's still in print from Liberty Fund of Indianapolis. It's a brilliant analysis of the danger and harm and the psychological motivations behind envy to understand part of what's behind these people. But matching that, Jacob, without in any way discounting that element, which is there at a certain core, is that what is the presumption against everything that you said? Well, what's wrong with being a millionaire or a billionaire if you've just honestly made the services, the goods and services from which the revenue has come through free exchange? But you see, Jacob, they don't accept that premise. They believe that the ownership of property per se is a demonstration of exploitation. It's Marxian. See, they don't talk about Marx anymore. You don't see them walking around with a Communist Manifesto or the turgid volume of his Das Kapital. But what they do all presume, in sort of like a floating abstraction, without trying to re-justify his debunked system, is that if one man hires another, and that to be hired because he doesn't have the tools to support himself, it's because the hiring individual has monopolized the tools, the means of production, and is saying, I'm going to let you use my tools of production so you can produce output upon which you will live along with your family, but I'm going to extract a part of what you've produced merely because I've asserted ownership out of the tools without which life cannot go on. I own the means of production. If you want to come into my factory and have access to it, of the 10 units of output that you produce using the tools that I privately own, I'm going to claim 3 or 4 units of your output. I'll leave you enough to live, but I've let you use my private property. They consider that the ownership of the tools of production is itself a demonstration of the exploitation and the injustice of the system. What they never ask is, how did the tools come into existence? Who did the saving? Who did the investing? Who had the entrepreneurial idea of what could be produced, how it could be produced, for what purpose it could be produced, and who might find the output produced with those tools worth something worth paying for, and therefore earning the income honestly by being the saver, the investor, and the businessman showing entrepreneurial acumen. That has no meaning to them. The mere existence of private property and accumulated wealth more than another means that the possessor of that wealth has exploited their fellow man. That is the core economic fallacy combined with the psychology of envy. And that is what drives these people in their own minds.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Let me switch gears to a certain extent and address the conservative movement on this whole controversy, because I admit that I'm very amused at the conservative response to this woman. I mean, they're practically obsessed with her, and they go after her on the weirdest things, like her dance video. And I was impressed by it. I thought it was a pretty good performance that she put on. But boy, conservatives were outraged. The guy who even posted the video thought that he was going to smear her with it, and instead, a lot of people got impressed by it. I was impressed by it, and I think there's something else going on here with the conservative obsession with this woman, and that is that she's really exposing that conservatives are really not much different from her. I mean, she's sort of a nightmare for them, because when she expounds her philosophy, libertarians like you and me can battle her at a fundamental level. We can battle Bernie Sanders or any of these liberals at a fundamental level, a philosophical level. Conservatives are not able to do that. Why? Because they share the fundamental philosophical framework under which she's operating. For example, when on this marginal tax rate, they're arguing over whether it should be 30% or 70%. Well, that's just a minor technicality. The fact is, she's exposing that Republicans share her position that government should be managing how much people should be permitted to keep, sort of as an allowance. The minimum wage is another example. You know, obviously, as a socialist, she's a big advocate of increasing the minimum wage. So how do conservatives battle against this? They say, oh, well, it shouldn't be $15 an hour. It should be $12 an hour. Well, you know, what kind of philosophical difference is that? There's none. And so when you see, for example, the black teenage unemployment rate, especially in the inner cities and so forth, that's chronic. It's been there for, you know, year after year after year of 30 to 40%. We libertarians can say, well, duh, when you've got a minimum wage of $15, you're going to lock all of these people out of the labor market. You're going to consign them to permanent unemployment. Republicans can't argue on that level. Or when she calls for Medicare for all, what's the Republican conservative response? Oh, no, we want Medicare for some. What's the difference? Medicare for some, Medicare for all. We libertarians say Medicare for none. There should be a total separation of health care in the state, not only because people have a right to manage their own health care, but also because their socialist system, Medicare and Medicaid and government intervention and licensure, has destroyed what was once the finest healthcare system in the world. So I think that's part of the reason why conservatives really are going after this woman so much. She's kind of exposing where they stand themselves philosophically and morally with respect to free market principles.
Well, the difficulty here is in the broader sense that you're pointing out, is the general drift that the American political spectrum has been moving towards last century, but particularly and especially since the Franklin Roosevelt administration of the 1930s. And that is the entire political spectrum, those who consider them conservative and to their, quote, left, Democrats and progressives and radical socialists. The whole spectrum has been shifting towards the collectivist side of this spectrum. In 1935, when Social Security was proposed by Franklin Roosevelt, the opponents of it, both the conservatives of that time and certainly the remnants of American classical liberalism, called that a socialist program. This was the government nationalizing pensions and retirement, that it would undermine people's senses of self-responsibility and personal freedom, and probably would financially not work. Right? Thinking of it in 1935, projecting what might be in the future, probably would not be financially sound. But it was viewed as outside of the American traditional system of freedom and limited government. It was socialism. The same way was viewed about Franklin Roosevelt's huge public works projects, or a minimum wage law, which he introduced, or giving unions power under law that other associations, either societal or business, were not allowed to have. All of these things were criticized at the time by their opponents as socialism. But the point you're raising has shown us that's how far we have drifted, because now Social Security is not socialism in the eyes of our conservative cousins. No, it is merely that minimal safety net that every American has. It's part of the American system. Or we don't want a single payer system of government national health care. But what we have to do is should just have an efficient sort of competing healthcare system that the government sort of has controls and regulations and subsidies around and underneath to see that social safety nets capture people. And why is it so difficult for conservatives to oppose this? I would argue two basic reasons, Jacob. One, a lot of them don't even realize that it's part of a socialist idea anymore. They really believe that this is part of the American way. The same way as you were pointing out, the progressives and the socialists in America think that what we have is capitalism. And at the same time, even if some of them have a sense that Social Security shouldn't be there, Medicare, Medicaid shouldn't be there, in the decision to join the political arena as an active candidate for public office, or a desire to retain such a public office that they have won in an election, they are basically cowards because they believe, and to be honest, probably right, that if they went out and said, I want you to elect me or to return me to office because I want you to understand Social Security is not just bankrupt, but is an unjust, unfair, and in the right sense, un-American system, or Medicare, or Medicaid, or minimum wage laws, or unemployment insurance, or food stamps, or subsidies of various sorts for many in the private sector, what's called corporate welfareism. They know that if they go and actually advocate that, they will not win an election. And they'd rather have power. And in their own mind seem to be, well, it's better for me to be here than the worst guy. They would rather be in office than to speak the truth and lose the election. And as long as that continues, the drift will continue in this collectivist and dangerously new Green Deal direction.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think one quest is to cause people to understand this is not a free society. When you've got massive mandatory charity, which obviously is not charity at all. Charity has to be voluntary to be meaningful. And you have a massive warfare state. There is no way that can be considered a capitalist, free market, free enterprise, free society. And then people can make a conscious decision. Do I want this socialist interventionist system, or do I want what libertarians are calling for? But that vision for what America should stand for as we move forward can only come from the libertarians, because both conservatives and the left are total disasters. So we're about out of time, Rich?
Yeah, if I just say, our situation is analogous to the Germany of the early 1930s. There once had been a properly liberal movement and liberal party in Germany around the beginning of the 20th century. But by the end of the 1920s and the beginning of the 1930s, what were the largest parties in the German parliament? The Nazis, the communists, and the Social Democrats. There was virtually no one representing a party of ideas for liberty in Germany. It's not surprising what Germany fell into among these competing collectives wanting power. Today we have an awakened left who feel that they're at the cusp of a new wave, and their opponents are merely wishy-washy collectivists who are just sort of wanting to be Me Tooism, but at a slower rate to retain their own power. And that is a bad situation.
Absolutely. But the light here is with libertarianism. So on that note, Richard, we need to wrap things up. We're out of time. Greatly enjoyed the conversation, and I look forward to talking to you next week.
Until next time.
Yep. Thanks for tuning in. Come and visit us at fff.org, and we'll see you all next week.